Busy Guy Show. My name is Vince Lo Cascio and I'm a busy guy. I'm here today with William F. Ludwig III, better known as Bill or B3 of WFL III Drums. Just to mention ahead of time that Ludwig's Drums has been around over 100 years, known for world-class quality, performance, and durability. B3, Bill, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Vince. How you doing?
I'm good. I appreciate your time because I know you are a busy guy. If we can't, please start off talking about how the founding of the company by your grandfather,
Yes.
who we'll refer to as Senior, your father, who we'll refer to as Dad, and then you as B3.
Correct. My grandfather started the original company, which was called Ludwig and Ludwig Drum Company, because it was he and his brother, in 1909. And he was a drummer. They were both drummers, but he got a gig with a vaudeville act that had faster music and needed a better bass drum pedal, so he made his own. And as the brothers started growing with people wanting that bass drum pedal, they opened a small drum shop in Chicago to repair drums, change heads, tune drums, and people would come to them and say, hey, I need this, or I need something to make a sound effect like this, and they would try to come up with it.
And he was born in Germany and came to Chicago?
Yes, his family moved over when he was, I think, about 6. Originally moved to New York, and then his father was a trombone player and couldn't get a gig, so they said, well, there's a good German community in Chicago. So they came here, and that's where they settled.
And that's part of the reason why they picked Chicago, because of the German community?
Yes.
Right here. Other interesting facts, amongst millions of them, was that he declined to play in John Philip Sousa's band.
I think he played with it one time, but then didn't join the band because I don't think he wanted to tour anymore. He had done touring when he was in his late teens and with the circus. And then when he got more involved in the drum shop and building drums, he wanted to stay in Chicago.
There's I guess you would refer to it as a booklet, My Life at the Drums,
Mm-hmm.
which is out there. I mean, it's available on like eBay and Amazon.
Yeah.
Do you remember reading that, or I'm sure? Or?
I didn't read it cover to cover, but I did glance over it, and it was quite a history he had.
Yeah. I mean, obviously a passion for it, but innovation. He didn't invent it, or he did invent the bass drum pedal, or he made his own.
He made his own. They were out there at the time, but they were big wooden structures, a big long foot pedal, big tall beater, and it was just slow and cumbersome to pack up and get around with. So when he came out with his own, he made it small and metal, and it went in his pocket, fit in his pocket, and that's what set him apart so strongly.
And then from all my reading, which is there's a ton out there to read, a pedal for tuning timpani drum.
Yes.
While you're playing it.
Yes. He, after the vaudeville act, some years later, he got a gig with the opera playing timpani, and they were all hand-tuned, each individual tension rod to get a different note. And he thought, man, this would be easier if I could tune these with my feet. But the problem was when you adjusted the foot pedal to tune it, as soon as you took your foot off, it would go back to the lowest note because of the tension on the head. So he developed the balanced action tuning, which is a spring at the bottom in the bass, and it balances the tension on the head so the pedal stays exactly where you left it.
I want to come back to tuning drums later, because the whole thing, people ask me, tune drums, I'm like, are they tuned? I have no idea. Which is going to tell you a little bit ahead of time that I know absolutely nothing about it. And then, to keep with the original history of the company, he sold the company.
Yes.
Bought it back. And if you want to tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it was towards the end of the Great Depression, and he was also, so he was a little nervous about his business because of that, but then he was making sound effects for the silent movie industry, and had about 6 pages of sound effects in the Ludwig catalog. And they came out with Talking Movies, and that put every drummer out of work the next day. So he sold his company.
And then
Well,
bought back.
well, and that was in, I'd say, 1940. He left the company he sold it to, and started his own company, which they said, you can't use your name, we own the Ludwig name. And he said, that's fine, I'll use my initials. So it was WFL Drum Company, but then he put William Ludwig President, real small under that, so everybody knew, oh, the Ludwig guy, because he was known so much for his quality and customer service. So that company operated until 1955, and the corporation that bought him had another drum line that they were trying to manufacture, and they just closed them both. So my father approached him and said, well, since you're not using the name, can we buy it back? And they said, sure. So that's when it went back from WFL Drum Company to Ludwig Industries. Because at that time we also bought Musser, Marimba Company, and a few other companies, so it was Ludwig Industries.
Which is a great segue into the question of how your dad got involved with the company.
Well, he was involved from a young age also in high school and college, and when he got out of the Navy, he started full-time as advertising manager and also doing artist relations because they go hand in hand. And he was, you know, all over Chicago every night, going to clubs, talking to drummers, inviting them out to the factory for a tour and showing them the tender loving care that we would give drums when we're manufacturing them. And so that's how he grew with the company. He was also doing conventions and calling on dealers.
He's credited with many innovations. A couple to mention. He talked about, which by the way, there's a fantastic interview with your dad on at the NAMM show.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And he talked about changing, you know, for style, for look, to plexiglass.
Yeah.
Different color plexiglass, lighted drums to put the drummer more in the spotlight.
Yes.
What can you tell me, you know?
Well, we were, you know, we were the biggest drum company in the world, and then the Beatles hit. And luckily Ringo chose Ludwig because he saw a sample of a finish, Black Oyster Pearl, on the dealer's desk in London and said, I want that. And the dealer said, well, only Ludwig makes it. And he goes, well, that's cool, I want Ludwig anyhow. So then they went on Ed Sullivan, and it just blew the roof off of everything. So we built an expansion of the factory, and then sales slumped off a little bit, which, as you know, everything up and down, cyclical. So Dad was looking for different materials we could make drums out of to spark excitement, get sales. And somebody said plastic, you know. There was a company making clear plastic drums.
Kind of like in The Graduate. Plastics is the future.
Exactly, yeah. So we got we got some plastic shells, and then we always like to make everything ourselves because it's the only way to control quality. So we learned how to melt the plastic and form the shells with they called it plastic welding. It wasn't glued. It was a chemical that went on it, and it melted both ends together. So then the next step was, well, let's make colors. So we bought all the different colors, sheets of plastic to make kits. And Dad was taking someone on a tour of the factory one day and saw all the scrap plastic lying around on the floor in a pile and said, why don't we do something with that? Let's make strike drums or pattern drums. And lo and behold, we came out with, I think, there was 6 different patterns that you could get with alternating colors, and it was a great idea because it used up scrap.
And always thinking.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Do you recall any drummers that Senior might have admired, that your dad admired, or that you admired, that come to mind?
I don't really recall any of the Senior's favorites. I know he was very heavy into the symphonic world, and those would probably be more timpanous that he was attracted to. But Dad was a jazz guy and loved Joe Morello, who was always out at our house. And that's one thing that really got me into drumming, was seeing Joe up close, the practice pad or behind the kit, and it's just, I said, I want to do that. I got to do that. Sadly, I never got as good as he was, but I don't think anybody really did.
Yeah.
He was a great guy. He was just a nice guy, and also Ray Baduke was one of our big endorsers, and Buddy Rich was with us a few times.
Some of the names that come to mind for me are Gene Krupa, Dave Clark. I thought was almost like a heavy metal drummer ahead of his time.
Yeah.
Charlie Watts, rest in peace.
Oh, he was great.
And Danny Seraphin from Chicago.
Yeah, all great drummers. I love them. But Charlie was just like a machine, you know, his time.
He apparently was a jazz drummer to start.
Exactly.
And he played Gretsch, just to throw it out there.
Yeah,
Is that what apparently he
always played Gretsch. In fact, it was kind of funny because Ringo, I was away from the drum business for about 18 years or so after we sold it. Dad and I sold it again in 1981. And during my time away, Ringo always kept in touch. You know, when they'd come to Chicago, I'd call his drum tech and, you know, he'd say, sure, you know, come to the show. And nobody's allowed backstage, but Ringo would let me backstage.
Really?
Yeah. And it was great because his all-star band, you know, I knew most of them from, you know, Greg Raleigh from Journey and Santana, and Steve Lukather from Toto, and so I knew all these guys from working with their endorsers in the past. And it was great. It was very nice of Ringo to do that. So when I did decide to start my own company, I told Ringo, and he said, that's great, I wish you the best. And I said, I want you to have the first drum I make. Okay, so then about a year later, I started to come out with wood shell snare drums. This was the metal shell, the metal trick shell that I did the first 50 drums with. Then I came out with wood shell drums, and I was just thinking about it. And I just located a supplier that I felt comfortable working with. And I get a call from Charlie's drum tech, Don, and he goes, hey, Charlie hears you're coming out with a wood shell snare drum. I'm like, I didn't tell anybody yet. And he says he wants to buy one of the low numbers. I said, how about
Charlie?
Yeah. I said, how about number 1? So Ringo has number 1 of the aluminum shell series. Charlie has number 1 of the wood shell.
That right?
Yeah, yeah. And then I got to take the drum to him and present it to him backstage, and he's a real nice guy. You know.
I don't want to get off on a tangent on it, but I think those two, from what all my reading, is what defines a good drummer is to play your, no pun intended, but to play your part.
Exactly, yeah. I forget who said it. A very famous session guy, I think from Nashville, said, the less you play, the more money you'll make. I thought that was funny.
Right. And there's just briefly too about what a competitive business it was. You know, with names like Slinger and Pearl, Rogers, Gretsch.
Yeah.
Anything you can tell me about that? I mean, was it a fight?
Oh yeah, it was brutal. And the real fight came when if you stole somebody's endorser or if they stole from you, which I call poaching, and I don't do, but that was always the challenge, to get an endorser, and you put a lot of money into them for advertising and equipment, and then they split, you know. So, but the classic was Slingerland, because they were in Chicago. They were in Niles. We were downtown Chicago, which is about 5 or 10 miles apart. And there was a Bud Slingerland. So Dad didn't like Bud Slingerland. And one day when I was in high school, on a Saturday, Dad comes in my room and says, come on, take a ride with me. And so I started to follow him out to the garage. And I said, where are we going? He said, we're going up to Slingerland. I'm going to look through their dumpster and see what they're working on. You watch for the police. And I said,
That's priceless.
no, several other words, way. Am I gonna go with you and be your accomplice on this outing? And he said, fine, I'll go by myself. So off he goes. He comes back about 3 hours later with an armload of stuff and throws it on the kitchen counter. Look at, they're working on a new shell, and look at this new throw-off they're working on.
Wow.
And he had gone through their dumpster to see what they were up to.
That's clever.
So that's competition, you know.
What about, why not? First off, they did make their own hardware, or Ludwig, right?
Yes,
And the skins as well?
yes,
Heads?
everything.
You're impressed I use that word skins? So that, but why not cymbals?
That's just such a different manufacturing process and has so many of its own problems, you know, of melting metals, of melting the right metals and getting the right mixture. So we just stayed out of that and let the experts, you know, like Zildjian that have been around since 1600s, I believe, hammer that one out.
So when people would buy Ludwig kit, they would pick and choose their cymbals, or you had mentioned earlier how that worked?
We would offer, you know, in the catalog, it just looks better to show a drum setup with cymbals on it. So we started saying, well, we'll show Zildjian, and if anybody wants to buy them, we'll sell them a set of, you know, basic hi-hat, crash, ride, and away they go. Because in those days, people weren't really into, you know, buying a different style of cymbal, or the, you know, dark ride, or thin ride, or whatever. The cymbal was a cymbal. And
What do you recall about, I know we talked about it, right, but about Frank's Drum Shop in Chicago?
well, that was a great store. It was always, you know, full of famous drummers coming through town and hanging out. It was the way drum shops should be, you know, where it's a comfortable atmosphere to hang out.
And that's all they sold?
Yeah,
Exclusive.
right. But there's not many like that anymore that are the cool place to go hang out, you know.
I just have to share the memory with, they had a floor tom with the top head off, and there were sticks, thin little stick, but they were like 25 cents a piece.
Yeah.
Any comments about the logo and the changes of the logo over the years?
Well, the logo evolved over the years, several different shapes and sizes. The main thing, though, was when Sr. started WFL Drum Company, he picked the Keystone as his logo. And I don't know if you're familiar with the way they used to build bridges in Europe, but they would build them from each side of the bank, and in the middle put a keystone, because that gives it strength. So he wanted to show his company had strength. And that was a very, very famous
This
logo.
is Senior.
Senior, yeah. And so the keystone was into effect until Dad bought the name back. And then we wanted to, you know, get a little more modern looking, and went to the parallelogram with the green and blue badge, which then changed to a silver and black badge. And then it went back to a keystone. And so it's just over time, people came up with different incarnations of it.
Which is almost a great segue for the national recognition when the night of Ed Sullivan.
Oh yeah,
That you were watching live.
Yeah, that was crazy. As I said, Ringo picked the Ludwig because of the color he wanted. You know, he wanted that color. So somehow it was communicated to the dealer that Ringo wanted a bigger logo than the little decal we used. And the dealer called my father in Chicago and said, you know, I think you should do this for this guy. This band might be big someday. And so Dad took up, and my grandfather's chomping on a cigar going, rock and roll is just a fad, you know, the hell with him. Put the decal on the drum head. And so Dad took it down to a sign painter. They bought a Beatles album to check out their logo. Put the logo on, put the Beatles on it, shipped it over to London, and Ringo bought it, loved it. Then 3 months later, they're on Ed Sullivan. And that logo was in every shot behind Lennon or McCartney, whoever, you'd see the Ludwig logo. And I was in 4th grade, sitting on Mom and Dad's living room floor. I'm thinking, this is cool. Look at our name in every shot. I didn't even know how big Ed Sullivan was. And I turn around and look at Dad, and he's like this, holding his head. And I said, what's the matter? And he goes, we're doomed. This guy is going to be so popular, so big, he's going to be a nightmare to work with. And he could be worse than Buddy Rich. And I went, oh, I don't know that's possible. Because we all know Buddy's a little of a perfectionist, so he tends to get uppity. But at any rate, Ringo was the nicest guy, just the opposite. Only called when he needed a kit for another tour. And that's the way he was to this day. I mean, I used to work with him when I was running artist relations when he first started the All-Star Band. And, you know, you get a call from Ringo's office that he wants a kit. And I'm like, where? You know, we'll get it, I'll get it there in an hour, you know. And he's like, no rush, he doesn't need it for 2 months.
We could put the pictures up, but the little story about the pictures with you, your family, with Ringo, and then with the Beatles and your sister, and that story, if you want to share that.
Yeah, that was after the Ed Sullivan Show, and the Beatles really started doing some major touring and selling, you know, album after album was a hit. Dad wanted to say thank you to him, and he didn't know quite how. And he had an idea to make a gold-plated, take a snare drum and gold-plate it. Every nut, bolt, and washer, even the snare strands, were gold-plated. So he called their management and said, I've got this present I want to give Ringo, where should I send it? And they said, don't bother with that, they're playing in 3 weeks in Chicago, we'll set it up and you can do a photo shoot, just give it to him. So Dad said, great, and he said, you know, bring anybody you want to bring. And I was in 4th grade, so he didn't bring me, he took my sister who was 16, which really pissed me off, but what are you going to do? And so she, you know, she was blown away to get to meet the Beatles. And during this...
No pun intended.
During the photo shoot, which you'll see in the pictures, there's a great picture of Dad chit-chatting with Ringo, and he's smiling. And then the next picture you look at, Dad's mad and got this scowl on his face. And apparently one of the band had leaned over to my sister in between shots and said, hello, love, how about dinner after the show? And Dad heard that and went, no.
Then, how did you get involved? I know in some of the reading that you started opening mail.
Well, yeah, in 3rd grade I was opening mail and stamping it received, but then every summer in high school I'd work in different departments, customer service, I worked in the computer department, order entry area, and really learning the business a little bit on the assembly line. But then when and I loved it, I always loved it. I always wanted to be around it, and I always wanted to be a drummer. And got out of college and, you know, came home to tell Dad, you know, hey, I'm out of college, I'm going to take the summer off and I'm going to travel and have fun and do some things. And he goes, yeah, that's nice, I'll see you in a week. I said, what? He goes, you start a week from Monday, don't be late.
Oh.
And I went, oh. So I get to the factory and I'm thinking, I was preparing and studying to run the manufacturing side of it. And Dad says, I had to fire the advertising manager, you're going to do that. I went, oh, I didn't study that. He goes, you'll learn. And he takes me back to my cubicle, which had 3 other people in the department, in the advertising department. And so they're trying to teach me, this is how we do a layout, this is how we do a poster. They were probably bored to tears trying to train me. And then a couple weeks later, Dad comes back and says, I just fired the artist relations person, you're going to do that too. I said, I haven't even learned advertising. Yeah, I haven't even learned advertising yet. He goes, you'll learn. So luckily, you know, I played in some bands growing up, rock bands, and so I fit right in with the artist relations program because going backstage to talk to drummers, and I could see what their playing style was and then make suggestions to help them. And I became very close friends with all of them, and it was great.
And your first, just a minute, your first set was Blue Sparkle?
Yes. Yep. I think I was 8th grade when I got that, and I thought that was the greatest thing in the world.
I don't know if you recall or can tell me a little bit about, obviously with the explosion of music and instruments and all that, everybody was selling drums, you know, Sears, Montgomery Wards. Anything about those, knowing about those type of drums? Or?
No, I just, I viewed those as at the beginning level, which it's understandable because their price point.
Mm-hmm.
But if anybody really tried to take them out and play live, they wouldn't hold up.
Yeah. You get what you pay for.
Exactly.
Some of the memories I have of bands and garage bands, guys taking the front head off the bass, blankets in there, cotton sheets on top of the floor tom.
Yeah.
They were miking drums. I don't know what you can share with that.
Well,
About that.
during those times, I think it was a lot of people weren't real good at tuning drums. So the only thing to do is take the front head off and muffle it as much as you can, and it doesn't. They thought it had more projection, but it really, if you muffle it so much it doesn't have any resonance, it hampers the projection. So.
Okay, we're kind of running short of time, but what you can tell me about it, and I know it's a long subject, about electronic drums, and drum machines, and the whole thing coming about and putting guys out of work.
Well, yeah, the drum machines bothered me because they were putting guys out of work and they were so sterile sounding and it sounded like a computer, which it was.
Mm-hmm.
And in the first early ones, they didn't have feel or anything programmable really. But I just kind of had to watch it be a fad and wait for it to go away.
And it's great to see how much live drumming and all that. I mean, the information that's out there about your company and everything, which we're going to talk about in our next show.
Oh, great.
We can talk about. So I wanted to say thank you for being on. And here's the tradition of the cannoli.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
So,
Nothing like a nice cannoli.
excuse me for one second, I gotta take this call.
Oh.
Hello.
Vince, it's Ringo's dog.
No, Ringo.
Still coming over.
No, I'm interviewing B3 right now. I'm not gonna have time.
Oh, tell him I said hi.
Yeah, Bill says hi. Bill said the drummer's slogan, beat it. All right. Thanks for being on the show. Bye, Ringo. But I gotta take off.
Thank you.
So,
You're a busy guy.
I am busy. So are you. God bless you and thank you.
Thank you.
All right. See you later.
See ya. Well, I don't know. Maybe I'll go have a cannoli. Can't believe he leaves me for Ringo. Ringo didn't get a cannoli.
And reading the Ludwig catalogs and seeing their pictures, never dreaming to meet them, I was fine with it until I got to the front of the church at the end of the service. And Jim and Bunny Carlos and B3 and a bunch of us were putting the drums on, getting ready to play, and it sort of hit me what I was playing for.
Hello up there. It's Vanell and Ludwig come back to honor you, fallen heroes of the Republic.